Hello everyone, myself Ashish. I am the faculty at Insights IAS. So today we are going to discuss about test 2 full length test, that is GS paper 3. In this GS paper 3, I am going to deal with the questions of environment ecology and internal security. So without wasting any time, let us start first with discussion of all the questions of environment and ecology. Let us see question number 8. Question number 8 is about air pollution. So air pollution doesn't limit itself to the boundaries of any kind, neither it should be its solution. In this context, discuss the concept of airshed management in air pollution mitigation in India. So question is something about airshed management and air pollution. So here we can start this answer by writing the idea about the air pollution, trying to tell that this air pollution is not only a national phenomena, rather a regional and a global phenomena, and in this context we need to take basically a global concentrated effort so that we can mitigate the climate change crisis. So here let us start with our introduction part, that is air pollution. Air pollution ka meaning is nothing but addition of unwanted substances, that is solid substances, liquid substances and gaseous pollutants like carbon dioxide, ozone, ground level ozone, etc. Liquid, that is acid rain, solid substances like particulate matter, etc. to the atmosphere that degrade the quality of the air, that degrades the quality of air. So yes, this is the idea about the air pollution. Now immediately try to tell that this air pollution, it is leading to global climate crisis, global climate change crisis, and hence we need a coordinated efforts, correct? Because climate change is not a national phenomenon or regional, rather it's a global phenomenon. Because here we know that the pollutants, let that be particulate matter, black carbon, carbon dioxide, generally tends to move with the wind, and the source region would be different, the destination region would be different. Due to this climate change crisis, melting of the glaciers is taking, and due to melting of these glaciers, the low-lying island countries are being impacted more. So I hope that you are getting the idea. Now, if you try to take an example, or a case study, immediately you try to write it. The third pole of the earth, that is Himalaya and Hindu Kush mountains. And Himalayan regions, which we call as third pole of the earth, are getting melted, right? Melting of the Hindu Kush Himalayas and Himalayan glaciers, we are finding it as to be melting. Now, this melting in Indian context is not only a national phenomenon. Rather, if you try to understand the map of India and the Himalayan glaciers, what we understand is that these are the Himalayan glacier areas, this one marked Himalayan glacier areas. So here the North Indian plains, Eastern China, North Indian plains, and the Central Asian countries contribute to something called as black carbon or other pollutants which are overlying over these glaciers and are leading to the intensification of the melting of this Hindu Kush and Himalayan glaciers. That means this melting of the Himalayas is not only the national phenomena, rather it is a regional, or I would say a global phenomena. So that is why a coordinated effort is needed. So that is why the question says that air pollution doesn't limit itself to the boundaries. So here we can tell that this example proves us that air pollution mitigation के लिए not only India, rather all the regional and at a larger level, at global levels are needed to take the efforts or mitigation efforts. So this is what is the example part, you can write it about, right? Now here in this context we need to take measures. In this context we need to take various mitigation measures. So mitigation measures, we know that are been taken at the global level through United Nations Framework, Convention on Climate Change, etc. and other international NGOs. But the question specifically speaks that out of these mitigation measures, one of the way which government of India has adopted is something called as airshed management. Airshed management. So here we need to write about airshed management. So let us try to explain this, what is airshed management. After this third point, so first point would be your meaning, second point would be the example, third point would be one of the mitigation measure is airshed management. So immediately try to tell what is airshed management. So what is airshed management, guys? So airshed management. So airshed management ka basic idea means basically it is an airshed includes complete or entire area over which the pollutants disperse due to meteorological and geographic phenomena. That means it can be any area, let that be area be a small, medium or larger area over which all the type of pollutants, gaseous pollutants or solid pollutants are dispersed due to certain meteorological factor. Now let us try to take an example and explain this. Why is that government of India have adopted this? So airshed management in Indian context, can be considered as Great North Indian Plains, or here I am taking a case study of Delhi NCR region. So in Delhi NCR region, each year in the months of the winter, were able to experience something called as winter smog and associated problems. So if you want to tackle the Delhi NCR smog, we need to take airshed management, not only at the Great North Indian Plains, but also along the Delhi NCR region. So let us try to understand the reasons. For example, for that first we need to understand the reasons for the pollution. So Delhi NCR ka smog is not only related to only Delhi, it is rather related to the adjoining areas and the territories. For example, the first reason is, here we know that it is due to the stubble burning that takes place in the adjoining areas of Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, right, mainly. Also we know that due to heavy industrialization in Delhi NCR region, also we know that increasing vehicular pollution, and also we know that along with this Delhi NCR region, there is heavy construction activities and urbanization, ongoing urbanization. All these activities, not only in Delhi, rather along Delhi NCR complete area. So here you can draw this diagram as a case study. So this is the Delhi NCR region. So this is New Delhi and this is the NCR. For example, here I am just trying to show you, this is Delhi NCR region, but this all complete area is contributing to the smog related issue in Delhi NCR. So it is not only just related to this part, rather it is related to all this part. So mitigation measures should include the complete area. And yes, due to this regions, multi-dimensional regions, not only located spatially to Delhi, Government of India have recently brought in a bill that is called as Commission on Air Quality Management Bill, right, where this commission is going to overlook over the various issues with respect to Delhi NCR pollution. It has been given various powers under this bill. Earlier there was something called as Environment Protection Control Authority, which was being empowered by Environment Protection Authority, but now this has been replaced by CAQM, that is, this is Commission on Air Quality Management. Is it clear? So we understand precisely that if the region or the reasons for any pollution related issue is not only territory specific, rather it goes beyond it. So due to this, we need to take measures accordingly. So let us see for example, for this measures. So in this context, the measures would be airshed management. So यहाँ पे I am saying airshed airshed management for Delhi NCR. For Delhi NCR. So कैसे करोगे for airshed management for Delhi NCR? First, through certain legal provisions. To certain legal provisions. Which are the legal provisions? First, this is the first legal provision, that is Commission on Air Quality Management Bill. Second, CAQM के बाद second, various provisions of Environment Protection Act 1986. It empowers central government to take various measures to stop environment pollution and associated issues. Similarly, for airshed management, cooperation and coordination between the different jurisdictions is needed to mitigate the air pollution problem, because it is not territory specific. Also it addresses the cross jurisdiction issue, right? And it also identifies the problem in totality, correct? So due to this, Government of India have adopted something called as airshed management approach in air pollution mitigation. And yes, this is a right approach, because as we have seen that melting of the glaciers of polar areas is not only impacting the biodiversity or climate in polar and temperate areas, rather it has also increased its risks along the coastal areas lying in equatorial and tropical areas, right? So that is why this air pollution and climate change is definitely a global phenomena, where we need to take a airshed management approach at a global level, and then smaller level, which will help us to mitigate this problem. Okay. So I hope that this is clear. Question number 8. So the first question of environment and ecology in GS paper 3 is question number 7. So this question number 7 speaks about the carbon inequality. It is saying that define the term carbon inequality and explain the ways to address the carbon inequality within India as well at the global level. So the core demand of the question is to explain the idea about the carbon inequality. Also, we need to substantiate this carbon inequality. Why is this carbon inequality present? How is it? The scenario about the carbon inequality, and then the mitigation measures. So let us see how to write the answer, because this question is for only 10 marks. So we have only precisely 7.2 minutes and only around 150 to 200 words. So let us see how to write the answer. So here we will first start with the answer with, I would say, the definition of carbon inequality. So what is carbon inequality? So carbon inequality definition, precisely the introduction part, we can write carbon inequality is the variation, in per capita carbon emissions, at national level and between the countries and between the different countries So here precisely we can say that the per capita carbon dioxide emissions by the people staying in USA with respect to the per capita emissions of the citizens of India is totally different. We know that the emissions are more in the developed countries context. So there is a variation. So this is the basic idea. It is a variation in the per capita emissions both at national level and between the different countries. Yes, this is what is the idea about the carbon inequality. Now here we need to substantiate this. So how can we substantiate the meaning or the definition of the carbon inequality? Yes, we can substantiate with the report. As per the report of Oxfam, that is share of carbon emissions, carbon emissions from from 1990 to 2015, we can see that there is a variation in carbon inequality. Kaise? Because the richest 10% of the people, the amount of carbon emissions by this richest 10% people on the earth is equivalent to the rest of the population. So this itself shows us the variability. Now this variability is because of the differences in the consumption pattern. Difference in the consumption pattern. Now we know that the consumption pattern of the Western countries is basically much more higher than the consumption pattern of the developing or underdeveloped countries. Similarly, we can also see these types of carbon inequality at national level also. For example, at national level, that is at India, in Indian context, what we can see is that at Indian context, we see that percentage of the population, and the per capita emissions, which emissions I am speaking about? The carbon emissions of an average person in the gigatons of carbon dioxide. In the tons of carbon dioxide, what we see is that the richest 10% of the people plus middle income 40% people and 50% of the remaining population, we see that the richest 10% of the people emit an average per capita income of around 8.8 gigatons, or I would say tons of carbon dioxide. The middle income 40% of the population reduces or emits around 2 tons of carbon dioxide, and remaining 50% emits around 1 ton of carbon dioxide. What does it denote? It denotes stark variation. Variation in what? Variation in carbon emissions, right? At national level also. So yes, these both the things give us idea about the carbon inequality at both at national and at global level. Now after this writing this introduction and basic idea that it is because of the change or the differences in the consumption pattern, let us try to write the next part of the question, which basically speaks about the mitigation measures, or I would say how we are going to address this challenge about the carbon inequality. Now here when we are writing the answer, the question is explicitly saying that we have to write it at both the level, that is at national level, that is at India, how we are going to do it, and at global level, how we are going to do it, right? At both the levels we have to write. So when we are speaking about both the levels, can I say that the mitigation measures, there are two ways through which the mitigation can be done mainly. First, you reduce the consumption pattern, or reduce the CO2 emissions by the rich people. Now, for reducing the carbon dioxide emission and for reducing the consumption, or I would say or increase the efficiency of consumption of the various resources. These are the only two ways through which you can reduce the carbon inequalities. So for this, what we can do is that सबसे पहला we can try to shift from traditional method of measuring the economic growth. Shift from traditional way of economic growth to something called as sustainable development, especially by the developed nations. Q, because in the recent times we measure the development of a nation with respect to its GDP, but this measurement of the development of a nation with respect to GDP of a country is not a right way, because there is always a standoff between economic growth and sustainability. So here we need to balance both. In this context, a limelight is provided to us by certain countries, that is examples like New Zealand, or I'm saying Bhutan, or Bhutan. So in the context of the New Zealand, we know that the budget presented is something called as well-being budget. Well-being budget. Or in the context of Bhutan, we have something called as gross national happiness. So if you are measuring the development in the context of sustainability, then definitely the consumption pattern will be on the equity principle, and also the carbon emissions will also be reducing at a national level also. So here this paradigm shift will also help in mitigating the carbon inequality. Secondly, we can see that we need to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions by the developed countries, especially through सबसे पहला हम लोग क्या करेंगे, टैक्सेशन, दैट इज ग्लोबल कार्बन incentive tax. So what is this? So global carbon incentive tax, or an idea, was floated by Raghuram Rajan sir. So as per him, if the idea of this global carbon incentive is that if every country will have an average global, or every person will have the national per capita carbon emissions. If any particular individual or a country in totality is emitting more carbon dioxide than its average national total, then we can add certain tax upon it. So that incentive in the form of that tax in the form of incentive, you can add it to fund and help in mitigation. Secondly, you can put on certain wealth tax or luxury tax, wealth and luxury tax. So because it is found by various reports that most of the carbon emissions are from transportation sector. In transportation sector, especially the big SUV cars, chartered planes, right? So these are being owned by the rich people. If you are taxing them more, then definitely what will happen? The carbon inequality will reduce in longer run. Similarly, if you try to understand that CO2 emissions can be reduced by the developed country by transferring the technology, especially the clean and green technology to the developing and underdeveloped countries, right? So through this ideas, what we can do, we can basically reduce the carbon dioxide emissions and carbon inequalities, correct? Here, then we also need to understand that we need to create certain alternative for the consumption of the masses, because we know that these masses, that is most of the population, is reducing less carbon dioxide. But if we try to provide them certain alternative, especially the clean alternatives, green alternatives and energy efficient alternatives, then definitely these guys, that is the masses, are also going to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions, correct? So this is a value addition to us. So for that, we need to provide something called as energy efficient buildings, example through energy efficient building, or subsidies for making use of the more renewable energy, etc. So these are the few ways through which we can reduce the carbon inequalities at the national and at the global level. Basically, most last conclusion or fourth point, what we can say is that, because since we have only limited time and limited space for writing this answer, we can say that for carbon inequality, for mitigation of carbon inequality, the principles like common but differentiated responsibilities, the principles like common but differentiated responsibilities should also be applied in the context of carbon inequalities and incentives should be provided to the developed nations. So henceforth, we can achieve sustainable development goal targets, and simultaneously it will help all the nations together to reduce something called as climate change crisis. Is it clear? So here you can end up with sustainable development targets and using an analogical principle of common but differentiated responsibility in the conclusion of the answer. So this is how you write the question number 7 ka answer. I hope this will help you. Let us move on to the question, another question, that is question number 70. The question number 70 says that discuss the environment impact of India's water usage, and do you think that the steps suggested in the draft National Water Policy 2020 or 2021 for efficient use of water are sufficient, and we have to critically examine. So here, let us first understand the question ka crux. Question is saying India's environment impact of India's water use. So for that, first of all, let us try to understand India ka water scenario. So if you try to understand India's water scenario, out of the total world ka available water resources, world's water resources, India has only 4% of the world's water resources. However, it is supporting around 17% of the world's population. 17% of the world's population. कौन कर रहा है ये सब कुछ? India is supporting this. That means itself shows inequality. Only small amount of water supporting the larger population. Also, this is further having spatial and temporal variation. It is having spatial and temporal variation. I am coming to the answer part. First, I am giving you idea and then I will come to the answer part. Spatial and temporal variation. Let us try to understand this. What is this? So here, if you try to understand India in Indian context, the average rainfall that India receives is spatially variable across India. So now, if you try to understand, these are the southwest monsoonal winds. So India receives only rainfall for mainly 4 months, right? And this rainfall is also variable. That means different regions will receive different type of rainfall. For example, Western Ghats will have more rainfall and Northeast India will have more rainfall, but this area is going to have very less rainfall. That means region to region, the rainfall is varying. Temporal means time wise. For example, it is found more in the month of June, July, August and September, right? That means temporally also variation is there in the availability of the water, and spatially also there is variation in the availability of the water. Also, census shows that in 2011, the per capita availability of the water was around 1545 cubic meter, and this is going to be in 2021, that is last year, it was around 1486 cubic meter. And if you try to understand a state called as water stress, then we know that if the availability of the water is less than 1700 cubic meter per person per capita per year, then that is called as a water stress condition. That essentially means that India is already water stressed and uske upar still the water crisis is increasing. So I hope that after getting this idea, let us come to the context of the question. Okay. So here the question says that discuss the environmental impact of India's water uses. So here you start the answer with that India's water uses both surface and groundwater is basically depleting and degrading. It is both. Groundwater is depleting and surface water is degrading. And we are already moving towards more water stress condition. And this water stress condition is further accompanied by inefficient water use. inefficient water use. Inefficient water use is seen sectorally across different areas, like for example agriculture. In agriculture, we know that in green revolution areas, that is Punjab, Haryana, where we had first green revolution, we see that water intensive crop, change in cropping pattern, shift from wheat to paddy cultivation because of more MSP, more use and insufficient use, overutilization of the groundwater is seen in this area. Similarly, there are also other examples. Similarly, if you try to understand domestic use, in domestic use, what we are trying to do? We are trying to make overuse of the water. Also, the use is very inefficient. Wastage is more. So, other area like increasing industrialization. Now, we know that for industrialization, water is very essential. However, in industries, the use of the water is very inefficient. And the principle of reduce, reuse and recycle is not followed in letter and spirit. So due to this inefficient water use, this condition of water stress is further increasing in its intensity. So yes, this has been also highlighted by World Bank in its report, where it states that India is the largest groundwater extractor in the world. So, due to this inefficient use, we need to take certain mitigation measures. Let us try to see the mitigation measure in the form of the National Water Policy. Correct? And this National Water Policy 2020-2021, we need to critically evaluate. So after writing this basic intro, this 3 points, 1, 2 and 3, let us try to draw one chart. So that will make your answer more presentable. For example, so here if you see that inefficient use, you can make an analogical diagram, chota sa aise. This is demand side and this is supply. So this is demand side of the water and this is supply side of the water, where you can say here that this is the total amount of supply of the water, both surface and groundwater, which are meeting the demands of the nation. However, this much amount of water, that is supply of the water, is either polluted or wasted or overused. Correct? That is, this is basically representing something called as inefficient utilization. And here we can see that demand is continuously increasing. Why it is increasing? Because of increase in population, increase in urbanization and increase in industrialization. So to address this problem on demand and supply side, we have something called as National Water Policy. So this National Water Policy 2020-2021 basically speaks on the two front. It speaks upon, सबसे पहला, demand side or demand based management. Now tell me from which areas you have demand. सबसे पहला, you have demand with respect to the agriculture sector, right? You have demand with respect to industrial sector. You have demand in domestic sector, right? Various sectors. Now here this policy explicitly in its gazette says that for agriculture, choosing the right crops, diversifying the cropping pattern, where you are going to choose less water intensive crops and sustainable type of agriculture, which is going to make use of efficient use of the water through something called as sprinkler irrigation, drip irrigation, etc. Similarly, for industries and domestic use, to reduce the demand, it says that try to make use much more efficiently. So increase in efficiency of water use, one. Secondly, it also speaks about something called as reduce, reuse and recycle. So reduce, reuse and recycle, along with the third principle called as polluter pays principle. So this principle you can apply so that the sector or the people who are involved in polluting the water and its availability is reducing. So due to that, the people will get more conscious and basically they will try to use it much more efficiently. So due to that, this demand side management of the water would be much more efficient as per this policy, national water policy. It also speaks about, secondly, it also speaks about supply side issues. So when it is speaking about the supply side issues, it says that in these supply side issues, first you try to conserve or save the water through watershed management, additional rainwater harvesting, watershed management, rainwater harvesting, etc. Due to this, the supply of the water will increase both along the surface, the rivers, lakes, etc. and also the groundwater levels shall improve. Along with this, it speaks about deploying supervisory, control and data acquisition. So what I mean by this is that you should have continuously one particular person who is being deployed to have continuous real-time data. So this system, if it is there in the place, it will try to tell us the real-time data about the availability of the water temporally and spatially. So depending upon that, the government can take the various measures. For example, as we have seen that Composite Water Management Index, which has been prepared by the Niti Aayog, tells us about the water stressed district. So how does we get the idea about the water stressed district? It can be got through this certain data analysis, right? Similarly, we can have a task group which would be completely immersed in something called as effective implementation of these policies, right? So that means simply supply side mein you have to increase the quantity of the water, right? So this is what is basically mentioned in the national water policy, that is through demand side and through supply side. But is it just sufficient? So here, when you're writing critically, yes, these are the good steps, that is positive steps which are going to help to recharge the aquifers, etc. And also it is going to reduce the environmental impact. Now you write about environmental impact, or here you can write about it is going to reduce the environmental impact which were caused because of this water stress. Due to water stress, we had certain negative environmental impacts. Negative environmental impact. Which were those? So here I am mentioning those. First, negative environmental impact, सबसे पहला, due to water stress, groundwater depletion. Due to groundwater depletion, what is happening? The diseases like arsenic contamination, fluorosis contamination and various other diseases which are going to pollute the water and make it unfit for drinking, not only for domestic purposes but also for the livestock. So this groundwater depletion would be one of the I would say environmental impact. Due to this, we can also see that the land degradation and desertification will further increase because the biological potential of the land is going to reduce because of lack of availability of the water. Similarly, environmental impact can be seen on biodiversity, because biodiversity is the total number and variety of the plant, animal, birds, reptiles, everything. For this life, you need water. But if the water itself is very scarce, or there is more severe water stress condition, then biodiversity is going to adversely impact. So to reduce this impact, a limelight in the present context is in the form of the national water policy. Okay, so is this sufficient to reduce this? So answer is yes also. And if you try to see the negative side, that is, it is still not, because here we need to improve something called as people's participation. because without people participation, nothing is possible. Right? It goes exactly like this. For example, if you consider forest, let me give an analogical example out of the box. If you consider something called as joint forest management or social forestry. So what is the meaning of social forestry? It is nothing but forestry of the people, by the people, and for the people. Similarly, water conservation is for the people, by the people, and of the people. Getting the point? For that, we need people's participation, and we also need to increase the awareness and improve the efficiency of water use. Yes, definitely this shall help us to achieve something called as sustainable development goals and basically reduce something called as water stress condition. Is it clear? So this is how you write this answer for question number 17. Okay. So let us start with another question, that is question number 18. So again, this is an important question because 20 years have been completed for Biological Diversity Act 2002 and recently it was also been amended. So in this context, this question becomes much more important. So let us try to see it. So question says that 20 years after India enacted Biodiversity Act 2002, it needs a review. So we have to elaborate this statement. We have to elaborate this statement and analyze the recently proposed changes, that is amendments. So let us start this answer by writing the objective of the Biodiversity Act. So कैसे लिखोगे आप introduction में? सबसे पहला, here you try to write Biodiversity Act 2002 ensures the protection and the preservation or conservation of the wildlife species to ensure ecological balance. So try to bring these keywords, right? Preservation or conservation of the wildlife to ensure ecological balance. It have mainly three aims. First, it aims for conservation of wildlife. Second, it aims to sustainable use the wildlife, and third, it aims for fair and equitable sharing. It aims for fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the wildlife biodiversity, right? Or biological resources. You can say out of biological resources. So after 1992 Rio Summit, there were mainly I would say 3 to 4 main conventions, just for climate change, sustainable development, biodiversity. For biodiversity in 1992 we had something called as Convention on Biodiversity. So India is also a member of the CBD, and to basically implement its provision, after 10 years we brought Biodiversity Act 2002, where we are also aiming for conservation of the wildlife and biological resources, sustainable use, and fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the use of the biological resources, especially to the local people in the tribal areas or in the forest area who are dependent upon these forest resources, or who also have the knowledge about these biological resources since the ages. So yes, sare three are the most important aims of this Biodiversity Act. After this second point, try to write that it has, question kya bolta hai, there is a need to review it. So here you try to tell that it has been 20 years since its implementation, and the implementation is done in 3-tier mechanism, where we have at national level National Biodiversity Authority, State Biodiversity Authority, and then Biodiversity Management Committees. So this is a 3-tier mechanism for the implementation of the Biodiversity Act. So here we know that Biodiversity Management Committee are at local level, which maintains something called as People's Biodiversity Registers. Also, to make use of the biodiversity and associated resources, we need to take the permission of the state biodiversity authorities or state biodiversity boards, especially by the Ayush practitioners, Ayush medicinal practitioners. So just have an idea about it. Now try to tell that the certain evaluation part of Biodiversity Act. For example, if you try to see since 20 years of inception, since 20 years of inception of the Act, inception of Biodiversity Act 2002, we notice the following things. First, that is positive things. For example, if you try to understand biodiversity conservation, we see that the biodiversity conservation and its sustainable use have seriously improved. For example, biodiversity due to, if you try to understand the Project Tiger, Project One Horn Rhino. Now I know that these are the projects, the species recovery project, and also tiger is conserved, one horn rhino is conserved under Wildlife Protection Act. But definitely the associated services are also mentioned under this. So basically, if you try to understand the biodiversity services provided by the biological resources have improved, and yes, there is a good case studies to supplement these arguments. However, there are still many concerns, that is negative points, because these concerns have been highlighted by IUCN report. So if you try to understand the IUCN report and its threatened category species, then what we understand is that in the recent times, the number of the species and the variety of the species, and the number of the species of both plant, animals, birds, reptiles, etc. have increased, right? And this is what we had seen in this recent IUCN report. Also, if you try to understand that something called as People Biodiversity Register. So this register is very, very important to be maintained at the local level, so that the local people get benefited because of their own knowledge. And then only we can ensure the third principle, that is fair and equitable sharing of the benefits. This can be only done, or I would say mainly done, if we are trying to maintain People Biodiversity Register. However, we have noticed that most of the times government have given it to the private players for the maintaining of this People Biodiversity Register, or most of the times PBR have not been maintained at the local level. So this is another concern. Similarly, State Biodiversity Authority at the state levels do not have complete authority to implement the provisions of Biodiversity Act in letter and spirit. So due to this, still there is a need for amendment. So these points show us that there is definitely a need to review, right? After 20 years, because after 20 years also, yet the biodiversity conservation, despite it have achieved certain desired result, it has not achieved complete result. So in this context, we have to do the amendment, and that is why government brought Biodiversity Amendment Act 2021, where it has proposed various changes. जैसे सबसे पहला, try to understand this 3-tier structure, then you will understand most of the things. For example, यहाँ पे मैंने क्या बोला था? Ayush practitioners. Generally, Ayush practitioner need the permission of the state biodiversity boards to make use of the biological resources. But to promote the research and development and the use of the biological resources by the Ayush medicinal practitioners, government have exempted, so I am writing here, government have exempted Ayush medicinal practitioners from taking the permission of the state biodiversity authorities to make the use of biological resources. इसके लिए गवर्नमेंट ने क्या किया? They have exempted Ayush medicinal practitioners. Similarly, certain medicinal plants like ashwagandha, etc. If you wanted to make use of it, do research, do development in that area of ashwagandha, still you are not exempted. You needed to have lot of permissions of the government, etc. So due to that, red tapeism was more. So government, to reduce that, have basically to reduce the pressure on medicinal plants have encouraged cultivation and use of medicinal plants. So this is another amendment. So also, most of the times, all these laws, environmental protection laws in the recent times, are moving towards civil offenses. All the offenses, if you are committing any offense or you are violating any provision of Biodiversity Act or Wildlife Protection Act, etc., you have criminal plus civil offense. But recent times, government have reduced, I'm saying it has decriminalized certain offenses and have increased civil offenses. So civil offenses, matlab the fines, etc., have increased. Fourth, and the most important point, is that it has fast tracked research and development and patenting work. And fifth most important point, that is to abide to the Nagoya Protocol, which is under Convention of Biodiversity. The CVD जो भी मैंने बोला 1992 का, उसके अंदर you have Nagoya Protocol, then you have Cartagena Protocol, Aichi Biodiversity Targets, etc. उसमें Nagoya Protocol speaks about fair and equitable sharing, just like Indian law speaks about fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the use of the biological resources. तो इसमें the fifth most important point, कब फायदा होगा उसको? When all the patents, etc., are with the local people. But now government, after this Amendment Act, have allowed foreign investment in Indian companies which are doing research and development on biological resources. Matlab still foreign investment is not directly allowed, but it is allowed now in Indian companies to promote the R&D in the biological resources. But again, this is going to be a concern, but the proposed changes to allow foreign investment in Indian companies, foreign investment in Indian companies that conducts or that does research and development in biological resource. So foreign investment now are allowed in the Indian companies which are doing the research and development in that respective biological resource. Now these are all the proposed amendments, but if you try to do the critical evaluation of this, then yes, this is a good part, because the fast tracking patents should be done, foreign investment be allowed, Ayush practitioners would be motivated to do various work related to the health sector by using the traditional medicinal practices. However, despite this, when these amendments were brought by the government of India, they were not consultative in nature. So less consultative or no consultations were done. This is one concern. Similarly, the foreign investment is said to be a backdoor entry. It is said to be a backdoor entry for the foreigners to get the idea about the biological resources in India. So again, it may lead to something called as biopiracy. And this is the biggest threat and the concern that the environmentalists are speaking about due to this proposed changes in the Biodiversity Act 2021. So definitely for this answer, you try to tell that yes, 20 years. In conclusion, what you will write? In conclusion, you write that to ensure ecological balance and to receive the various goods and services from the ecology, we need to preserve and protect all the wildlife. In this context, sustainable use and abiding the provisions of Nagoya Protocol, which is because why it is a concern, that is why I am speaking. So abiding the provisions of the Nagoya Protocol are essential. So this is what you can write in the conclusion, and this is how you can conclude the answer. And these are all the body part of the answer that I have, the question that we have right now dealt about. I hope that this is clear. So these were all 4 questions related to environment and ecology. I hope you understood. Now let us start the internal security questions. Let us see question number 10. Question number 10 says that the biggest challenge for militancy in Jammu Kashmir, that is, it is speaking about some challenge, right? For what? Militancy in Jammu and Kashmir would be to deal with the hybrid militants. So question is about hybrid militant. So challenge coming from the hybrid militant. So it is asking, what do you understand by hybrid militants? And can the promotion of the democracy, that is, it is also speaking about something solution. Okay. So can the promotion of democracy at the grassroots level decrease the utility of the violence perpetuated by the militants? So it is just speaking about, so few years back, we had got a question about overground workers. And generally, in the recent times, there is an increase in the militancy in the Union Territory of Jammu Kashmir. So when the DIG or the DGP of the state, or sorry, Union Territory takes the press conference, generally makes use of these words, that is overground workers or hybrid militants. So yes, definitely you can expect the question upon what are these hybrid militants. So let us try to start the answer, introduce, tell the meaning of it, hybrid militants, issues associated with the hybrid militants, and then a solution in the form of the participatory democracy. Let us try to analyze it. So in introduction part, definitely militancy in Jammu Kashmir. We start with answer with our militancy in Jammu Kashmir. So the militancy or insurgency in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir is a state sponsored terrorism, right? State sponsored terrorism hai, right? That is, state means who? I am speaking about Pakistan. And also non-state actors like various terrorist outfit groups, Jaish-e-Mohammed, etc. There are many are also involved in fueling militancy in Jammu Kashmir. The militancy in Jammu Kashmir is a state sponsored terrorism and is responsible for underdevelopment and radicalization and growing radicalization in Kashmir Valley, right? In Kashmir Valley. It is also aided by porous boundaries, correct? Porous boundary. So due to this porous boundary nature of the state of Jammu Kashmir, for example, we know that this is a state of Jammu Kashmir where India and Pakistan shares the border, especially in the three different geographic terrain. For example, here you have marshland, that is in Kutch area. Here you have a desert area, this is Radcliffe line, and from here, from Azad Kashmir, the line goes on till this part, right? This is Siachen Glacier, which moves from this point, that is MJ9842 till Indira Col, and this is your Siachen Glacier. This is the India-Pakistan border, but this India-Pakistan border, you need to write all these points. You can draw a small diagram. You can tell that these borders are porous, where India's proximity to something called as Golden Crescent and the infiltration along these porous boundaries aids the militancy in Jammu Kashmir. But this is not the demand of the question. This is just the introduction part, only 2 lines. Militancy in Jammu Kashmir is state sponsored terrorism and it is aided by the porous boundaries. But the biggest challenge, the biggest threat is posed by something called as hybrid militants, correct? Hybrid militants. So after giving this 2-line introduction, let us try to tell what are these hybrid militants. So let us try to tell what are hybrid militants. So just understand, hybrid militants, what are they? These are nothing but these are nothing but militants. But these are disguised militants. Why disguised? That means they are normal civilians. But during certain times, just like sleeper cells, they will conduct certain attack, sabotage, raids, or killing of the civilians or the employees and then again leading a common life. That means hybrid militants are the terrorists disguised as the civilians, and they are not listed in any police records. So basically, if you try to understand, यहाँ पे क्या है? They are disguised. But who are they? Terrorists. They are terrorists, they are disguised, but they are actually residing as civilians. So also we cannot identify them because they are common civilians and they are not listed in any police record. So the task becomes furthermore much more complicated. So can I say these are nothing but unrecognized militants? That is, they are unrecognized militants. They are unrecognized militants who carry the attacks, and lead or go back to the normal lives. So due to that, this is a concern. Also, we can say that in the recent times, I'm just writing here, overground workers and hybrid militants, these terms were frequently in news, especially by the government officials while taking the press conferences. So there is a very, very, very thin line between overground workers and hybrid militants and also normal civilians, because it's very difficult to identify these hybrid militants. So that is the issue. The issue is nothing but issues associated are, it is difficulty in identification of the hybrid militants because they are self-radicalized. And also radicalized through the use of the social media, internet, etc. Also, their ideology is completely radicalized, which is not matching with the state ideology. So due to that, they make the use of the violence. So making use of the violence will create instability, or that is instability, right? Getting the point? So propagating violence, creating instability and self-radicalization and their identification are the main issues associated with the hybrid militants, and that is what is the biggest problem or the threat that the Kashmir is right now facing about. And this is what the government officially says about. So the second part of the question is saying is that what are the measures, that is mitigation measures. In this mitigation measures, the question itself says that can the promotion of the democracy at the grassroots level be an alternative to this? So let us try to understand. So I'm writing here itself, promotion of the militancy, promotion of the democracy at the grassroots levels. At the grassroots level, can it be a solution to this hybrid militants? So let us try to analyze it. So first is that, what is that this promotion of democracy is going to do? Sabse pehla, it is going to engage the people. Because trust me, for India-Pakistan problem, it is only dialogues, negotiations, or in the context of the militancy, specifically in the context of the Jammu Kashmir, it is the engagement of the people. It is the participation of the people. That can be only solution, because participation will help the people to be more responsible. It will help to identify and address the local problem of the people by themselves, because that is what is the democracy ka meaning. That is, for participation, what we are doing? Engaging the youths. So after engaging the youths, you are trying to identify their problems, address their problems. So that is why this dissatisfaction towards the state, that is towards the nation, will also reduce. Definitely, it will also strengthen the democracy. It will improve the governance. It will improve the governance. Due to improvement in the governance, there will be development, there will be employment opportunities, there will be education. Due to this, again, the militancy will definitely reduce, radicalization will definitely reduce. So that means, yes, definitely democracy, especially at grassroots, by engaging the youth especially, can be a short-term and also a long-term solution. Along with this, what we need to do is that, सबसे पहले we need to also ensure the proper rehabilitation, identification and rehabilitation of the radicalized youth. We need to provide certain skill development initiatives to these youths. We need to ask this youth to come to discuss, to tell their problems, so that on the basis of legal and constitutional boundaries, within that boundaries, we'll try to resolve the issues. So if they themselves, the radicalized, the dissatisfied youth, they themselves, for example, within the constitutional and the legal frameworks are doing the governance purpose, then what is the problem? That is going to basically promote the democracy at the grassroots, right? So due to this, definitely it is going to be a solution. So let us see 19th question of internal security. The question number 19 related to internal security. Armed Forces Special Power Act must evolve. Question is saying that AFSPA should evolve into effective and applicable law which shall unite various organs and constituents of the state rather than dividing them. Matlab, there is some problem in AFSPA. This is what it is saying. But we need to unite all the constituents in the AFSPA. Let us try to analyze what are these. Discuss in the context of the recent changes, further reforms required in the act किसके लिए? To balance the human right concerns with the need for the national security. So here it is speaking about the AFSPA. So in introduction, you can start with few ways. First is that you can try to tell about the objective of the AFSPA, what it is and why is it is giving more powers to the armed forces. Also, you can start by telling the recent issue that happened in the Nagaland in Mon district, where 14 civilians, that is villagers, were being killed by the armed forces. So let us see how to write an introduction. So here what we can try to say is that ki AFSPA, Armed Forces Special Power Act 1958 is a act which grants extraordinary powers and immunity to the armed forces in disturbed areas to ensure law and order. So इसका मतलब क्या हुआ? This act, which is a colonial act, actually 1942 का act है, which have been later promulgated as an ordinance and उसके बाद bill हो गया ये. This act, which is presently applicable in the Union Territory of Ladakh, Jammu Kashmir, Himachal, right? So basically it is applicable in the former state of the Jammu Kashmir. Then uske baad I would say in Arunachal, certain districts of Arunachal. Uske baad in Nagaland, Assam and Manipur. It gives extraordinary power to these armed forces in kahan pe? Disturbed areas. Now what are the disturbed areas? These are the areas declared by the central government or by the governor or by the administrator in the state. It can be a particular district or a specific area as notified by these respective people to ensure law and order. So this act itself gives extraordinary powers kisko? Armed forces ko, to ensure law and order, and it is also granting the immunity. So these disturbed areas are declared under section 3 of the act and they are being given extraordinary powers and immunity under legal immunity under section 4 of the legal immunity under section 4 of the law. Getting the point? So this can be a precise introduction. So due to this legal immunity, there have been a lot of issues and concerns. This is a basic introduction, first two lines. Now I am writing the next part, that is, there is, due to this legal immunity, there have been concerns associated with violation of the human rights, then comma, due to violation of the fundamental rights, human rights and fundamental rights, extrajudicial killings, etc. These are the issues, right? Example, in the recent times, 14 villagers in Mon district in Nagaland were killed accidentally by the armed forces. Due to this, the local people and the state authorities are not in the favor of implementation of the various provisions of AFSPA. I hope that you got the introduction. These are the 6 to 7 lines that you can mention. Since the question is for 15 marks, this 6 to 7 lines can be a precise and good introduction. Now, let us try to understand why is it a concern and why it has been a controversial. It has been controversial. Next part is the act has been controversial. The act has been controversial in the recent times due to the issues associated with the powers granted to the armed forces under this act. Why? Because it provides legal immunity from arrest. It provides legal immunity from arrest. Okay. It provides legal immunity from arrest, or I would say actions, and it allows the armed forces to arrest anyone without the warrant, right? And it can also it empowers the armed forces to stop and search the vehicle. So these all are the draconian powers given to these armed forces. Due to this, it is highly controversial in the recent times. Plus, there are instances of extrajudicial killings due to the violation of human rights. Example, a PIL was filed in Honorable Supreme Court which said that around 1528 people have been killed extrajudicially. That is, extrajudicial killings have been done by the armed forces from I would say 2000 till 2012. मतलब 10 साल में around 1500 people have been killed extrajudicially. So again, this is a violation of the human right, basic right. So due to this, it is in a lot of news. Plus, there have been instances of rapes, abduction, torture of the local people by the armed forces, and that is why the local people are protesting against this law. Getting the point? Uske baad, there have been violation of the fundamental rights. Example, Article 22 of the Constitution of India gives us the fundamental right with respect to arrest and detention. However, as per this act, the armed forces can arrest anyone on the basis of suspicion without any warrant. That means it is contradictory to Article 22 of the Constitution of India. Getting the point? So similarly, if you see another, they are being given, the armed forces have been given blanket immunity with respect to all their actions. So without anyone asking you anything, if you are given complete independence to do whatever you want, then again there is a chances that you can misuse your power. So again, it is in controversy. So similarly, all these provisions of AFSPA and these issues are violating the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, which India is signatory to. In the Gandhian state of India, where non-violence is there, wahan pe you have violence, your human right issues, your fundamental right violation. So that is again, matlab, many issues are there, right? So United Nations Human Right Declaration, United Nations Declaration of Human Rights have been also violated because of the AFSPA and its associated provisions. So yes, this has been controversial, and due to this, there is a demand for repeal from various sections or the constituent elements, जैसे the state, that is the state governments, plus the local people, and the third important is the armed forces. These are the three main constituent elements. Getting the point? Actually, the law and order is a state subject, but when the nature of the crime and law and order is not able to control, then first of all paramilitary forces and then military forces can help to ensure this normalcy. And to ensure normalcy, armed forces have been given, to bring back normalcy, armed forces have been given more powers. So in this context, it is justified that the draconian provisions are needed. Jaise, it is needed to ensure law and order, it is needed to contain the insurgency in Northeast especially, and it is also needed to contain the cross-border terrorism. So henceforth, providing the more powers to armed forces is also needed, but there should be a fine balance and accountability of, and where all the section of society or where all the constituents related to this act should be taken care, that is state government, people and armed forces. In this context, to balance this act, various committees have been constituted. Jaise Justice Jeevan Reddy Committee, Justice Jeevan Reddy Committee. There have been various committees. Justice Hedge Committee, Justice Verma Committee, Virappa Moily Committee, many committees which have been in favor of repealing the laws. Now, when you want to write the second part of the question, that how it can be done, ye wala second part, that is, rather than dividing them, we want to unify who? The state government, the police, the people and the military. Then we need to changes and the further reforms to balance all the things. So iske liye this committee has given very nice recommendation. It has said you repeal the certain draconian provisions. Secondly, it says that you apply the AFSPA Act and its provision on case by case basis, not in totality. Also, you give more powers to the police or the armed forces under Unlawful Activities Prevention Act 1967 rather than directly giving blanket immunity. Getting the point? Also, it says that you need to build the trust and support of the people to bring them on the table for the discussion of this law to address the concerns. Also, it speaks about ensuring justice for the victims through especially fast tracking the courts, right? So, and when the inquiry is held, it should be done on the transparent basis. Transparency should be there. Transparency should be ensured while the inquiry is being conducted on the armed forces. That means accountability should be there. So if you are following these 6 points, then you are going to achieve the 7 point, that is, you are going to adhere to the human rights. This is what Jeevan Reddy Committee says. And if you are doing these 7 points, this 7-point principle will help us to achieve something that is a balance between all the sections of the state, that is state government, police, people, all the people, and henceforth we can achieve something called as internal security in the context of unfriendly neighbors, porous boundaries, and transnational organized criminal linkages. These all are challenges, but if we want to achieve all these things, we need to take people into confidence, build the trust, ensure the justice. So ये सब कुछ करोगे तब जाके this will be helpful, and we will ensure something called as national security. So this is how we write answer number 19. I hope that you understood it. So let us see question number 20. Question number 20 is about data security have assumed सिग्निफिकेंट इंपॉर्टेंस. सबसे पहले हम लोग बोलेंगे व्हाट इज डेटा सिक्योरिटी एंड इट्स इंपॉर्टेंस. ओके, एंड देयर इज नीड फॉर क्या, देयर इज अ नीड फॉर कंटिन्यूअस एंड कैलिब्रेटेड अप्रोच to deal with the rising cyber crimes. So here we have 2 to 3 things, that is rising cyber crime, data security, significance of the data security. Okay, and there is a need for a continuous and calibrated approach to deal with all these things. In this context, discuss the strength and the weakness of the recently withdrawn basically PDP bill. That is, क्या है इसका नाम, क्या इसका नाम, पर्सनल डेटा प्रोटेक्शन बिल 2019. What India can learn from other countries in this regard? So let us start with the answer. Here what you can say is that सबसे पहला you can also try to tell what is the cyber security. What is cyber security? Cyber security is nothing but protection of the system, network and data over cyber space. Correct? Protection of systems, networks and data over the cyber space, where the data integrity is essential. मतलब data safety is essential because data is a new oil. Because data is a new oil, that means it is very significant thing. And data security, either you can start with this point or this point, one of this, not both. Data security का meaning बोल दो. Data security is basically protection of the data from theft or misuse. So if you are able to protect your data from either theft or misuse, then that is a data security. By whom? By individuals, by corporate and by government. Yes, in the recent times, as per NCRB report, the cyber crimes have increased 4 times as per the recent NCRB report. That means the crime is committed through using electronic medium or computers have increased in the recent times, where the data have been compromised at many instances. Example, you can tell of spoofings, you can tell of spams, you can tell of any cyber secret that you know, right? So this is what is the concern. So after this, the question says that data security has significant importance. After giving idea about data security, and yes, the instances of this data breach have been happening in the recent times, there is a need for data security, or tell few points which show the significance, in the other words, tell the significance of data security. Because the cyberspace and the data in the recent times have assumed critical importance, because most of the government facilities and critical infrastructure which are linked to the national security are connected to each other by cyberspace and data. So in this context, to ensure the privacy of the citizens and the basically the critical data with respect to national importance should be protected. And yes, there is issue about data mirroring, data localization, data privacy, etc. in the recent times. Correct? So in this context, there is again I am repeating, there is a need for the data security, and hence we need a calibrated approach. Presently, next point. So first 2 points are here. Then this is the third and fourth point, fifth point. Presently, data is governed and protected under the various provisions of IT Acts and rules. IT Act 2000 and associated rules are helping in protection of the data. However, are they sufficient? No. In this context, in Honorable Supreme Court in 2017, a Puttaswamy case Puttaswamy case was filed, where Supreme Court held that data privacy is a fundamental right under Article 21, and hence, since data privacy is a fundamental right under Article 21, and hence in this context, Government of India, to bring various provisions or associated or to resolve associated issues with respect to the data security, brought in a commission called as B.N. Sri Krishna Committee. B.N. Sri Krishna Committee. And on the recommendations of this B.N. Sri Krishna Committee, Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 was brought in by the Government of India. Correct? And now here we have to write about various positive and the negative aspects of PDP bills, that is Personal Data Protection Bill. So now when you are writing about this part, let us try to write the various provisions. So Personal Data Protection Bill aims to regulate, the personal data of an individual. Why it want to regulate the personal data? Because the personal data is a fundamental right. There is a right to privacy to the individual. So इसीलिए PDP says that you have the right to regulate your own data, where the PDPB trifurcates, or it divides the data into three types. Trifurcates the data into three types, that is 1, 2 and 3, where it says that the first type of data would be personal data, second it would be basically sensitive personal data, and fourth it would be critical personal data. It has divided the data into three types: personal data, sensitive personal data and critical personal data. And it also speaks about regulation of the personal data to ensure right to privacy, because data privacy is considered under Article 21 by Supreme Court. In this context, it gave various provisions, right? Like regulation of the personal data for processing, collection and storage. That is, there were issues about data localization. Now, I'm not going to context of data localization and data mirroring. So, individual person, that is you, the people watching right now this video, you have the right where you want to store the data, whether you want it to be collected and how it is going to be processed. आपको right रहेगा, because that is your personal data. You also have right to, here another right, that is right to forgotten, right? That means you can delete, update, delink your data. It also speaks about the individual right to data, individual complete right over its data, right over data. Also, it speaks about independent regulatory authority, that is Data Protection Authority, which will monitor the implementation of the various provisions of PDP bill. It then says about, it speaks about data mirroring, that is, it speaks about removing data mirroring को remove करना है. And then in the sixth provision, it speaks about prevent the misuse of the data by data fiduciaries, that is data intermediaries. For example, WhatsApp, Facebook, intermediate companies है ये दोनों, मतलब they are linked, right? That means WhatsApp का data Facebook can use to improve their business, Facebook का data WhatsApp can make use to improve their business. So this type of misuse of data without taking the permission of the individual users, you cannot do it. That means you are holding accountable the data fiduciaries. Also, they have mentioned specifically about the social media also. They have mentioned about social media, the regulation about the social media, and not complete regulation. They have said about the data that the social media companies have about. So all about this are the 7 provisions, which the main 7 provisions this PDPB has, and it is going to ensure certain positives. जैसे positive क्या होगा इसका? Data mirroring नहीं होगा. Secondly, data protection would be there. Then Data fiduciary misuse won't be there. Then data privacy would be there. These are all positives. However, there are certain concerns related to it. That is, there are high chances that certain provisions with respect to PDP bill can be invoked by government on arbitrary ground. Arbitrarily ground. Q arbitrary ground because here the provisions are there with respect to critical personal data and sensitive personal data. You can give advisory or any other, I would say, advisory to the companies or other governments which speak about in the interest about, we speak about the national interest. So in the national interest, government can basically give the directives. But the definition of this national interest term is very open and vague. So there are chances that it can be misused. Not only with respect to individual data, but any other data. And this is what was seen in the terms of the Pegasus snooping case. Also there is an attempt, the critic says that there is an attempt to control the social media because it is the largest influencer of the 21st century. Also, if you try to understand another concern, the cyber attacks, despite bringing PDP bill, cannot be controlled because cyber attacks are not national phenomena. The cyber attackers are disguised, sitting in other jurisdiction, making use of the fast technology. It is very difficult to ensure the cyber protection, complete cyber protection in the present times. So again, this is another issue despite bringing this act. Getting the point? So these are the certain concerns. Despite this, the last part of the question says that what India can learn from the countries in this regard. So here, in the last part, what you can do is that here you can try to tell about European Union, South Africa, etc., which have brought the laws like general data protection rules. Then European Union's ka rules, that is, uske baad South Africa ka law. All these are the international examples which have brought all the stakeholders together and have brought a law which is going to ensure data privacy also and freedom of speech and expression also. Because these are two contradictory points where both should be having a balance and plus reasonable restrictions. So India can take inspiration from European Union laws, also South Africa's laws, and then bring in this law as earliest as possible. This is how you can conclude this answer. I hope that this shall help you. Okay. So these were all questions related to internal security and environmental ecology. I hope that this discussion shall do certain meaningful value addition to your knowledge and to your answer writing. Okay. I wish you all the very best for the aspirants who are writing this mains examination. Okay. Thank you very much.